It is the most dominant program in the history of college football against its conference competition. Mark Rogers TV looking at every ACC schedule this fall. We're ranking them 14 all the way up to number 1, and we stop at number 6, Florida State. Since the Seminoles joined the ACC in 1992, FSU has won 15 of 23 conference championships. They did not win a conference championship from 2005 to 3 years ago, 2012. They won 3 straight against Jimbo Fisher. So do the math here. Florida State had a 7-year drought from 05 to 12. They've won 15 of 23. So they have locked down the ACC other than that 2005 to 2012 drought. And they're back on a roll with a national championship, a playoff appearance, and 3 consecutive conference championships, 12, 13, and 14. So the first thing I look at in assessing the ACC is, does a particular team have to play Florida State? Well, of course, its own division, yes. The Coastal Division has a bit of a bye in not having to play Florida State and Clemson on a regular basis. So that's my first criteria, is looking at the Florida State-Clemson factor and, to a lesser degree, Louisville and North Carolina State in that division. Well, of course, Florida State does not have to play itself, so that's a big bonus. Who do they play in the other division? Well, they've got a pretty tough stretch this season in drawing Miami, their traditional rival from the other division that they always have to play, in Georgia Tech. So that's my first criteria. Who do you have to play in the other division? Because that could be a huge wild card in this when we look at the divisions. Do you have to play, let's say, for example, Clemson and Florida State, or do you play Syracuse and Wake? Or for Atlantic Division foes, do you play Georgia Tech and Miami in the Coastal, or do you play Virginia and Pitt? It's a huge disparity. And for FSU, the tough draw, relatively speaking, in Georgia Tech and Miami. And it's a pretty tough stretch here. October 10th, 17th, and 24th, that 3-week stretch at the end of October in playing Miami, Louisville, and Georgia Tech. Florida State taking it a bit easy in non-conference play. They typically schedule somebody really, really tough in addition to the final showdown against Florida. So the Gators are usually a top 10, if not top 5 program, but that hasn't been the case for the last few seasons. So Florida State, of course, finishes up with a Florida team that we would project to be roughly a 500 squad, 6-6, 7-5, something in that range in the SEC. But Florida State's other non-conference games pretty light here. So there's no Oklahoma State, there's no Notre Dame like last season. So FSU, despite their struggles, despite squeaking out all those games, their non-conference was really tough and scheduled to be the toughest in the country last season. Oklahoma State, Notre Dame, and Florida, even though Notre Dame and the Gators not as tough as they typically are. This year it's Texas State, it's South Florida, and it's also a game against Chattanooga before they finish up with Florida. So the oddity of playing 2 non-conference games to finish out 2015, I don't like it, and I will run down my formula schedule for conference scheduling and non-conference scheduling at another date. But right now for Florida State, it's highlighted by the game against Florida, of course, out of conference, and then the 3 softies, and then in conference, a date against Georgia Tech and Miami in a 3-week stretch in which it's going to decide its season in taking on Miami, Louisville, and Georgia Tech. Toughest team on the slate is, of course, November 7th, a date at Clemson. The Tigers and Noles, considered by Vegas right now to be an even split in winning the division championship and getting back to the ACC title game. So that's our take on Florida State's schedule, the 6th most difficult in the ACC. Don't have to play themselves. That's our take on Florida State. We'd love to hear from you right here on Mark Rogers TV.